Technique 33, Cold Call. If I was working with a group of teachers and had to help them make the greatest possible improvement in the rigor, ratio, and level of expectation in their classroom with one technique, the technique I'd choose might well be cold call, the practice of calling on students regardless of whether they raise their hands.
The 4 purposes of cold call.
There are 4 reasons why this simple exchange has such a transformative effect on a classroom. 1. Checking for understanding. Knowing whether you taught it is easy, but knowing whether they learned it is hard and requires you to be able to ask questions of any and every student at any and every time during your lesson to assess who knows what. If you are limited to assessing only those students who raise their hands when you ask a question, you will never be able to assess all the members of your class. And what's more, you will think you've achieved more mastery than you have. Students who volunteer to tell you that they think they understand something are more likely to know it than the students who don't. 2. Creating a culture of engaged accountability. When students see you calling on members of the class who don't have their hands raised, they will come to understand that raising hands is an opportunity to signal that they have something worthwhile to say, but not a tool they can use to control whether or not they participate in class. They come to expect and prepare for the possibility that they might be asked to offer their opinion or answer a question or solve a problem or read something at any time. 3. Pacing. Picture this scene from a classroom near you. Mr. K is reviewing a problem set from last night's homework. He says, "Okay, who'd like to tell us how they answered number 2 on last night's homework?" Pause. Crickets. Finally, after 5 or 6 seconds, Natalie raises her hand. Unfortunately, she just answered the previous question. So, Mr. K tries another approach. "I'm seeing the same 2 or 3 hands," he says, scanning slowly and awkwardly. "Do I need to remind you that participation is graded in my class?" Teachers like Mr. K routinely waste a great deal of time, 10 or 15 seconds per question perhaps, but hours and hours over the long run, pleading for someone to answer their questions. What's worse, watching a teacher desperately plead for someone to participate slows the perceptive clock to a crawl. It would have been a lot simpler, a lot faster, and a lot less painful for everyone for Mr. K to say, "Oh, okay, let's take a look at the second problem. How'd you answer that one, Mohammed?" 4. Backstopping your ratio. By itself, cold call is an excellent tool for ensuring a high participation ratio. It causes all students to be engaged and ready to answer, but it also helps boost think ratio by backstopping other techniques that are cognitively demanding. Let's say I give my students 30 transparent seconds of wait time to reflect on a challenging question about the novel The Giver. Having asked my students to think deeply and independently, my telling students I intend to use cold call on the back end of the activity, or merely making a habit of it, makes my most rigorous activities less discretionary and more accountable. If my students know that the 2 minutes during which they are to write in reflection are likely to end with, "Okay, so a tough question, let's hear what some people reflected on. We'll start with you, Tabari. What did you observe here?" they will engage more fully, and they are more likely to do their best work. Watch clip 32 of Hannah Loftus. You'll notice that her cold calling follows a distinctive rhythm. And although the lesson she's doing, sight words, is particularly well suited to an especially brisk pace, you can still establish a rhythm, albeit slightly slower, in the rate in which you ask questions. The benefit is that, as a former student of mine put it, when you start a rhythm, people join you, even without your telling them to. Hannah, for example, never says, "Let's review these words as fast as we can." Her kids just respond to her pace, and she manages to ask a lot of questions in a short amount of time. Checking in with every student in the group, it's much easier to establish a rhythm when you're cold calling and don't have to worry about who raises their hands and how fast.
Word 1, what word? Cartier.
Monday.
2, what word? Tatiana.
Laundry.
3, what word? Dion.
Yesterday.
4, what word? Dion.
Mysterious.
Mysterious. 5, what word? Janai.
Stomach.
6, what word? Jameer.
Tuesday.
7, what word? Marcellus.
Possible.
Very good. Let's go top down.
4 keys to an effective cold call. As with any powerful tool, it's important to use cold call effectively. Poor implementation can do as much harm as good. There are 4 keys to effective cold call. Number 1, keep cold call predictable. Cold call works in building a culture of engaged accountability, in part because students know a cold call is a possibility. The fact that it might be coming causes anticipation, and the more plausible it is that the students could be cold called, the more they will anticipate and the more engaged they will be. If you cold call reliably for a few minutes of your class almost every day, students will come to expect it and change their behavior in advance. They will prepare to be asked questions. If your cold calls surprise students, they may learn a lesson. Darn, I should have been ready. But one too late to help them. They may also feel ambushed, caught off guard, and therefore more likely to be thinking about the past. Why'd she do that? Then about the future. I'm going to be ready. If cold calls are predictable and students begin to anticipate them, the effect will be universal. The ultimate form of predictability is transparency, explaining to students the first time you use cold call exactly what you'll do, why you'll do it, how often you'll do it, and how they should react. We call this a rollout speech. Scripting some brief remarks to explain the what and the why makes the exercise rational, systematic, predictable, and with a little skill, inspiring. You can watch in clip 33 the rollout speech that the champion teacher Colleen Driggs gives her 5th graders at Rochester Prep. Colleen quickly tells her students how to act during a cold call, explains why she uses this technique, and, you'll surely notice, frames the activity in a positive way. It's a chance to shine and show that you're on fire.
All right. In some of your classes, your teachers do this thing. It's called cold calling. In fact, I do it. It's when you don't raise your hand and a teacher, William, calls on you just to see, and it's not like a gotcha. It's really just a way to do a quick review. I don't call it cold calling, though. I call it hot calling, because you get a chance to shine and to show that you are on fire. So almost every day when we're talking about genre, we're going to do hot calling. It's a great way to review all of these definitions and terms that we've learned. Here's the hardest part about hot calling. You got to keep your hands down. Your hands are folded. I will call on a person. When I call on that person, you track just like you normally do, and then you track me when you hear my voice again. Nod if you understand. Nod if you are ready for hot calling. Beautiful. Keep your hands down. Shabrian, I'm going to come back to inconsiderate and absent-minded at the end. If you're on perch, you track forward like normal. Please don't call out. Slam. What is the definition of genre? Hands down. Robert, what is the definition of genre?
Many teachers assume that cold calls have to be stressful for students, that they'll be forced to participate when they don't want to. But your expectation of students' interests are often a self-fulfilling prophecy. As you watch Colleen, make a list of the things she says that you could do, that you could borrow or adapt if you have a rollout speech to explain cold call to your students. 2. Make cold calls systematic. Teachers who use cold call take pains to make it clear that cold calls are universal. They come without fail to everybody, and not an effort to single out students for lack of attentiveness, or in response to specific behaviors, or according to some other hidden calculus. Cold call is about expectations, that this is how we do it here. And that means asking cold call questions in a calm, even tone, perhaps even with a bit of a smile or a look of sincere interest. Most champions I've observed are careful to cold call in batches so that it couldn't appear as though one person was in the teacher's sights. They cold call all types of students, not just those whose attention might be questioned, say, and sprinkle their questions to all corners of the room, not just that certain group of desks in the back. Some even track their cold calls, or plan them in advance to keep themselves accountable for getting everyone with reasonable consistency. I've even seen Julie Jackson keep a chart on the wall during her reading groups for this purpose. It had the ancillary benefit of reminding students that her cold calls came to everyone in the end. Be cautious of tying your cold calls to specific behaviors when you're not sure students are eager to be called on. If you say, I see you hiding over there, Caitlin, you not only risk making Caitlin self-conscious, but also cause students to think about whether they look as though they are hiding and how they should look if they do or don't want to be cold called. Besides, a cold call is not a punishment. As teacher Colleen Driggs puts it, it's a chance to shine.
Keep cold call positive.
The purpose of cold call is to foster positive engagement in the rigorous work of your class. One of its benefits is that students occasionally surprise themselves with their own capabilities. They don't volunteer because they don't think they can answer, but when they're forced to try, they are happily surprised to find themselves succeeding. In other cases, students suspect they know the answer, but are hesitant to volunteer for a variety of social reasons. Such students benefit from answering, sometimes surprising themselves at their own success, and always knowing that you thought they were capable of answering the question. A cold call is a good thing, an opportunity you give your students. When you cold call, you want students to get the answer right. In your heart, you have to be rooting for success. If you're not, your cold call could be a gotcha, calling on a student when you know he was tuned out in order to chase him. What did I just say, John? Or, isn't that right, John? I recommend against this. Cold call is an academic technique. It's designed to engage all students in the academic discourse of your classroom. You don't want to confuse an invitation to participate with a consequence or a correction. You can ensure positivity by using an even, slightly upbeat tone, suggesting that you couldn't imagine a world in which a student would not want to participate. If you're worried that a student might be anxious, start with a very simple question. Did you try problem 2, David? To establish a bit of comfort. Then ask a more substantive one. Good, tell us what you got. In addition, consider the power of explaining to students in advance what to do if, 1, they don't know the answer. Smile, say, I'm not sure, and then add, but, and give me your best guess. Or 2, their classmates can't answer. Be supportive, smile warmly, and track them. Don't raise your hand until they've done trying. And remember that all of us will be there at some point. One final aspect of cold call that leads to a positive tone can occasionally elude some teachers when they aren't prepared. Both the question and the ideal answer should be clear. Every teacher has had the experience of asking a student a question that, in retrospect, wasn't clear. It's doubly important to avoid this kind of question when cold calling. Many teachers address this challenge by planning their exact questions and answers word for word as part of their lesson planning process. 4. Unbundle your cold call. One way to maximize participation ratio of cold call is to unbundle questions. Break up larger questions into a series of smaller questions, ideally with contingent answers, and distribute them to multiple students. This can give you fast, energetic pacing if you want it, and a culture of peer-to-peer accountability. To help visualize what unbundling might look like in practice, consider first a teacher who cold calls a student, Dewan, and asks him how to find the volume of a cylinder. The class listens while Dewan ably describes the necessary calculations, but they become increasingly passive participants to the exchange. The longer it continues, the more they rightly suspect that they won't play any role in answering. It's easy to tune out a bit. Now compare that sequence to this one, which also uses cold call, but unbundles the question.
How many variables and constants do we have to consider in finding the volume of a cylinder? Did you, Anne?
3 of them.
Good, tell me one, Janella.
Radius.
Okay, and did you, Anne, is that a variable or a constant?
Radius is a variable.
Okay, so what's the other variable, Carl?
Height is the other variable.
Good. So what's the constant we need, Kat? Pi. And how do we know it's a constant, Jamia?
Well, because it never changes.
Good. So Taylor, when I multiply my constant and my two variables, I get my volume, right?
Well no, you need to square your radius.
Ah, yes. Thank you, Taylor. Well done.
By breaking up a simple question into several cold calls, the teacher in this scenario keeps the pacing fast and all students on their toes. In making questions contingent on another, she forces students to attend even more closely. Not only were 6 students engaged actively, where only one had been before, but all students were likely thinking through the answers silently, giving the plausibility of being called on. And because the students are all working together towards answering a question, unbundling tends to build a positive, cohesive culture. It makes school a team sport. Another simple but useful way to make unbundling work is to add a bit of scaffolding. To start very simple, to give students an early taste of positivity. You might, for example, begin a sequence of cold calls by asking a student to read the question. This allows you to engage the student successfully, the answer is right in front of her, and signals to the rest of the class to be on their toes. Plus, it allows you to be conversational and positive in your follow-up. Thanks, Marta, and what did you put for your answer? Or you might start by asking a simple yes or no question. Were you able to come up with an answer to number 6, Sean? Which you can use to diffuse any anxiety before you follow up. Great, let's hear what you said. Or, okay, tell us how far you got. Of course, a sequence that begins with a simple question should progress to more rigorous follow-up questions, ones that build think ratio as much as participation ratio. Starting simple doesn't mean ending that way, but it does tend to engage and motivate students and cause them to be inspired by building level of rigor and challenge.
The one I wanted to go over was the very first one. We have a rectangle. What are the dimensions of it, Lamani?
X minus 1 and X plus 3.
X minus 1 and X plus 3. What's the other piece of information we're given, Tevin?
That the area is 32 inches.
Good. Area is 32 inches squared. Nice, glad you included the unit. Now, how do we find the area of a rectangle like this? Chelsea, your hand was up in your mind, I could tell.
Would you put it as like X plus 3, if it proceeds, then put X plus 3, and then equals 32?
That's exactly right. So,
I mean,
yeah, that's exactly right. We'd multiply our length times our width. Then x minus 1 times our x plus 3 is equal to 32. Now, you guys are FOIL champions. I don't want to waste your time by doing that. When you FOILed it out, Anj, what'd you get?
It's x squared plus 3x minus 1x minus 3 equals 30.
Okay, we're not finished though. What do we need to do? Yeah, no, we're going to pick on you.
Me?
Yeah, you.
You're going to run like her.
Okay, what do we have?
3x minus 1x.
Which is?
Equals 2x.
Okay. Great, so now I'm going to look for factors of -3 that add up.
No.
Yeah. Factors of C that add up to B.
no.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Terry.
You have to let your equation equal to 0.
Oh, so what do I need to do in order to make this equal to 0?
Subtract 32 from both sides.
Okay, so I subtract 32 from both sides of the equal sign. 32 minus 32 is, now we're there. -3 minus 32. We were 3 steps from 0. We took 32 more steps from 0. Where do we end up? Yeah, good.
Thank you for listening to this presentation on Technique 33, Cold Call from Teach Like a Champion 2.0.